You never expect to wake up to a crane smashing through your roof at 6 in the morning. But that's exactly what happened to me on a Tuesday I'll never forget. I'm Zachary Weller, 39, divorced, and just trying to enjoy my little slice of peace in a neighborhood where the biggest drama should be lawn clippings and trash bins. Instead, I got drywall in my coffee and a crane arm in my kitchen. The noise was like a bomb going off. I stumbled out of bed in pajama pants, heart pounding, dust choking the air. My entire living room ceiling had caved in. The crane's massive steel arm had crashed through the roof, tearing through the beams like paper. My jaw dropped as I looked up at the gaping hole and saw the cab of the crane perched on the edge of my house. I stormed outside barefoot and saw the crane operator standing with a bunch of HOA board members, all gathered like they were watching a movie. And there she was, Barbara Zindel, president of the East Maplewood HOA and self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac. She was in her usual uniform, oversized sunglasses, a tight floral blouse, clipboard in hand, and the kind of smug expression that made you want to throw something. I pointed at the crane. "Are you out of your mind? You dropped a whole crane on my house." Barbara didn't flinch. "Mr. Weller, this is part of the approved beautification project. We're replacing the sidewalk trees and extending the decorative light poles." "You were notified. You think a notice gives you the right to destroy my house?" She waved her clipboard like it was holy scripture. "You signed the community covenant. We have jurisdiction over infrastructure improvements." Another board member, some guy named Alan with a permanently furrowed brow, added, "We did a vote. It passed." I laughed loud and bitter. "A vote doesn't give you the right to operate heavy machinery without permits or safety protocol." Barbara's voice dropped into that condescending coo she loved to use. "Zachary, don't be dramatic. It's just a little roofing damage. We'll have a contractor patch it up." I looked her dead in the eye. "You're paying for every inch of it, and I'm calling the city." Her grin twitched. "Let's not escalate things unnecessarily. We don't want to risk your standing with the HOA." That's when I knew. They were going to try to bury it. Pretend it didn't happen. Gaslight me into silence. But I had security cams, a cracked chimney, and a very good reason to fight. They thought I'd just swallow it and move on. They had no idea who they were messing with. I didn't wait for Barbara or her clipboard posse to say another word. I grabbed my phone, stepped onto my porch, which now had a generous view of the sky, and started filming everything: the crane, the shattered beams, the shocked neighbors peeking out from their windows. And most importantly, the cluster of HOA board members standing there like they hadn't just committed felony-level property damage. None of them tried to stop me. That was their first mistake. Within 20 minutes, a building inspector, 2 fire trucks, and a city code enforcement officer were parked in front of my ruined home. I hadn't just called the city, I'd called the non-emergency police line, the local news tip line, and a lawyer friend from my college days who now worked in municipal liability. The fire captain, a no-nonsense woman with a clipboard of her own, walked through the wreckage with careful steps. She didn't say much at first, just took notes, snapped photos, and asked for my security footage. I handed over the USB drive I'd backed up while waiting for them. When she turned to the HOA board, her look could have split granite. "Who authorized this equipment to operate on private residential property?" she asked, voice flat. Barbara adjusted her sunglasses. "The HOA board approved the landscaping renovation. It's part of the neighborhood's master improvement plan." The fire captain didn't blink. "Was a licensed operator contracted?" Alan, still clutching his manila folder like it had answers, spoke up. "He's certified in commercial projects. He's done work for us before." She looked at him. "Is he licensed for residential demolition or structural modifications?" That shut him up. The city inspector joined in. "You're telling me you brought in a hydraulic crane, parked it 6 feet from a residential structure, and didn't pull a permit, didn't notify Public Works, didn't consult risk management?" Barbara's voice got thin. "We didn't think that was necessary for light landscaping." This isn't light landscaping. The inspector pointed at the debris. You collapsed a roof. That's structural compromise. You're lucky no one was killed. That's when the cop stepped in. A younger officer, maybe late 20s, but he had the calm glare of someone who'd seen enough incompetence for one morning. "Sir," he said, turning to me, "are you willing to provide a statement?" I nodded. I already uploaded the footage to a secure folder. And I've made backups. Barbara's face twitched. The officer turned to the HOA board. "Until we sort this out, I'm advising you to cease all construction activity immediately. If I see another piece of equipment moved in this neighborhood, I'll cite all of you for reckless endangerment." "And obstruction," the inspector added. The crane operator tried to slip away during the commotion. He didn't make it past the second mailbox before the officer waved him down. "Sir, I need ID and licensing paperwork. Now." The guy looked like he wanted to melt into the asphalt. Meanwhile, I stepped back into what was left of my living room. The hole in the ceiling framed a slice of blue sky where my ceiling fan used to be. I sat on the only intact chair and let it all sink in. They were going to try to bury this. They had no idea how deep the hole was now. By evening, the story was already picking up steam online. A local reporter from Channel 11 showed up with a cameraman. I didn't have to do much. The footage spoke for itself. A literal crane crashing through a suburban home didn't need dramatic narration. I gave a short interview. Nothing inflammatory, just facts. The HOA had authorized the equipment without permits. They'd invaded private property. No one had checked structural limits or safety regulations. And now my house was uninhabitable. The reporter nodded. "We're hearing they may have violated city code." "They violated a lot more than that," I said. After they left, I stayed up late, reading through the HOA bylaws again. I'd read them when I bought the place, of course, but I hadn't paid close attention to the deeper clauses. This time, I was reading with purpose. That's when I found it. Section 14.7, Emergency Infrastructure Authorization. It was a vague clause, obviously written by someone who thought ambiguity was a virtue. It allowed the board to make immediate decisions on behalf of the neighborhood in situations involving public safety, urgent beautification, or community-wide hazards. Barbara had hung everything on that one line, but the clause came with a catch. It required immediate reporting to city authorities within 24 hours, and the improvements had to be reviewed by an independent inspector within 72. Neither had happened. I documented everything. Screenshots, time-stamped emails, the footage, the clause. I wasn't just going to sue them for damages, I was going to dismantle their entire board. The next morning, the city issued a stop work order for the entire East Maplewood HOA. All projects frozen. Equipment locked down. The crane, impounded. Barbara showed up at my temporary rental that afternoon. She didn't look smug this time, just agitated like a cat thrown in a bathtub. "You've made quite a spectacle," she said, not bothering with greetings. I opened the door wider. "You're standing on private property. If you're not here to apologize and write a check, you should leave." I came to offer a resolution. She handed me a typed letter. It was a settlement offer, $15,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. I held it with 2 fingers, like it might be contagious. "Did you think I'd just take hush money? It's more than fair." My roof caved in. My chimney's cracked. I have to gut half my kitchen. And you think 15 grand and a gag order is fair? She crossed her arms. "If you escalate this, you'll be dragging the entire neighborhood through mud. Property values will drop. No one wins." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "If I don't, you'll keep pulling stunts like this. You've been running this place like your personal fiefdom for years." Her eyes narrowed. "You're new here. You don't understand how things work." I leaned against the doorframe. "I understand enough. You operate through intimidation and loopholes. You bend the rules until they snap, but this time you broke something real. And it's not going away." She stepped back like she wanted to say more, but didn't. She left without another word. I took the offer, scanned it, and forwarded it to my lawyer friend. Then I shredded it. By Friday, the city had opened a formal investigation into the HOA's operations. Turns out the crane incident wasn't the first overreach, just the loudest. There were complaints going back 5 years, unauthorized fines, property liens filed without cause, even a case where they tore up someone's garden for violating symmetry standards. No one had fought them before. Not like this, but I had the receipts. And now the city had them too. Barbara had tried to silence me with hush money and innuendo. She was about to find out what happened when the quiet guy with the wrecked house decided to speak very, very loudly. The following Monday, I received a call from a city attorney named Carla Vaughn. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Weller, we've reviewed your footage and the documents you submitted. I'm assigning an investigator. We're opening a formal inquiry into HOA misconduct. There's sufficient concern over improper use of funds and unauthorized construction activity." That last part caught my attention. "Improper use of funds?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "There's no record of a licensed contractor being paid through legal HOA channels. The payments. Well, let's just say they didn't go through any HOA-approved accounts." I stared at the dented filing cabinet I'd rescued from my destroyed study. "You think they were paying someone under the table?" She paused for a moment. "We'll find out soon." The next day, I met with the investigator, a former fraud analyst named Troy Delaney. He looked more like a mechanic than a government official. Rolled sleeves, weathered hands, and a permanent squint like he was always trying to see through people. He carried a battered leather folder and a pocket voice recorder. "I've dealt with HOAs like this before," he said as he walked the perimeter of my house. "They start with fines and end with embezzlement. The crash might have just blown the lid off something bigger." He asked if I had access to past HOA budgets. I told him I didn't, but I knew someone who might. Her name was Grace Lynn. She used to be on the HOA board before she moved 2 blocks over and out of the HOA's jurisdiction. I remembered her from a few neighborhood barbecues, the kind of woman who could memorize a spreadsheet and still win a pie contest. She'd left after what she once called a very quiet coup. When I called her, she didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting for someone to finally drag that board into the sunlight," she said. "Come by tonight, I've got files." Her garage was a paper fortress. Stacks of old meeting minutes, expense reports, and unread newsletters dating back nearly a decade. Grace handed me 3 thick binders with color-coded tabs. "Barbara never thought anyone would keep hard copies," she said. "She started scrubbing the digital records 2 years ago." "What's she hiding?" I asked. Grace tapped on one of the tabs labeled landscaping contracts. "Start here. You'll see the same name pop up on invoices: Davis Site Works. But there's no corporate registry, no business license, and no insurance filings under that name." I checked. I flipped through. Dozens of payments made out to Davis Site Works, ranging from a few hundred to several thousand, approved with nothing more than Barbara's signature. No board votes, no third-party quotes, no receipts. Troy took photos of every page. By Thursday, the city filed a subpoena for HOA financial documents. That's when things got messy. Fast. Barbara called an emergency board meeting. They tried to limit attendance to board members only, but half the neighborhood showed up anyway. Several folks had seen the news segment, and suddenly, everyone wanted to know where their dues had gone. Barbara stood at the front of the community center, flanked by Alan and 2 other trustees who looked like they'd aged 5 years since the investigation started. Her tone was clipped and defensive. "There's no cause for panic," she said. "The city is asking routine questions. We're cooperating fully." A hand shot up from the crowd. It was Mr. Kepler, the retired firefighter from 3 houses down. "Then why'd you try to block the subpoena?" That shut the room up. Barbara's smile tightened. "It wasn't a block. It was a request for clarification." Another voice, this time from a young couple near the back. "You've been pulling money for years and we've never seen an audit. Where's the transparency?" Alan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "We've always had your best interests. "You dropped a crane on someone's house," a woman shouted from the side. I stepped forward, holding up one of Grace's binders. "This isn't just about the crane. These are copies of financial records that don't exist in the HOA's official books. Payments to a company that doesn't legally exist, all authorized by Barbara personally." Barbara's voice sharpened. "You have no authority to accuse us of criminal behavior." "The city disagrees," I said, "and so does the county. I spoke to a district attorney this morning." That was true. Carla Vaughn had looped in the DA's office after Troy's findings flagged a pattern over $100,000 in unaccounted disbursements over the last 3 years. The DA's white-collar unit had already begun preparing charges. Barbara's face drained of color. The room erupted into voices. Some angry, some confused. Neighbors who had always stayed neutral now turned to each other with questions they should have asked years ago. Where had the money gone? Why were fines increasing every year? Why had Barbara refused to hold elections for the past 2 terms? I didn't need to say much more. The documents were already doing the talking. 2 days later, Barbara was arrested. It happened quietly, no sirens, no cuffs in front of cameras. But word spread fast. The charges were serious: fraud, embezzlement, negligent endangerment, and falsification of public records. Allen resigned the same day, and the remaining trustees scheduled an emergency vote to dissolve the board until a new one could be established. Several neighbors offered to help me clean up my house, but I declined. I'd already hired a contractor, one with actual credentials, and filed a civil suit to recover the full cost of the damage. The city filed their own suit too, aiming to seize HOA funds still in reserve. The best part: the judge granted a temporary freeze on HOA accounts. Not a single dollar could be moved until the investigation concluded. Grace joined the interim committee to help manage the transition. She called me the next week. "Funny how fast things change," she said. "You went from new guy with a hole in his roof to the reason we have a functioning HOA again." I didn't care about titles or praise. I just wanted my home back and for people like Barbara to stop treating neighborhoods like kingdoms. The city eventually appointed a forensic accountant to untangle the HOA's books. Turns out, Davis Siteworks was a shell company. The bank account was traced to Barbara's cousin in another state. They'd been laundering funds through fake invoices and pocketing the majority. Troy's final report confirmed it. Over $160,000 siphoned through fake contracts, inflated fines, and unauthorized dues increases. All of it orchestrated by a handful of people who thought no one was watching. They were wrong. By the time spring rolled around, my roof was rebuilt. My kitchen was brand new. And the HOA? It was now governed by a 5-member board elected by open ballot, every seat filled by someone who believed in transparency, including Grace. Barbara pleaded guilty to multiple charges and took a plea deal that included restitution and a 10-year ban from holding leadership in any neighborhood organization. The neighborhood changed after that. People talked more, attended meetings, asked questions. Not because they were suspicious, but because they finally realized it was their right to know. And me? I finally installed solar panels. No more permits needed. The new board approved it without a second glance. Funny how peace returns when you pull corruption out by the roots. The morning of the restitution hearing, I stood outside the county courthouse in a tailored gray suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding. The air was dry, the sun low behind the government building's columns, and there was a noticeable quiet in the crowd of residents gathering nearby, all former East Maplewood neighbors, all watching history take its last turn. Inside courtroom 6C, the judge was already seated when I entered. A no-nonsense woman with sharp features and a voice that carried through the wood-paneled room without effort. The bailiff motioned me to the plaintiff's bench, while Barbara Zindel stood stiffly beside her attorney across from me. She had traded her usual floral blouses for a subdued navy pantsuit, her hair tied back, her face unreadable. The court clerk called the case. Weller v. East Maplewood Homeowners Association with additional charges filed by the County of Brookridge v. Zindel et al. This wasn't just about a roof anymore. It was about everything they had done while hiding behind the illusion of neighborhood governance, the fake contracts, the manipulated budgets, and the coercion that had kept residents quiet for years. The judge started with the criminal charges. Barbara had already accepted a plea deal, so this was about sentencing and restitution. The district attorney, a tall man with a bow tie and a file thick enough to choke a shredder, laid out the timeline of fraud. He presented the shell company documentation, the bank transfers routed through family members, even the recorded phone call between Barbara and her cousin discussing how to bury any questions if someone asked where the money was going. The judge listened without expression. When the DA handed over the statement from the city's forensic accountant, detailing how over $160,000 had been funneled into personal accounts, she tapped her pen twice before speaking. Miss Zindel, you have pled guilty to 5 counts of financial misconduct, 2 counts of criminal negligence, and 1 count of falsifying public records. Do you have anything to say before I issue sentencing? Barbara finally looked up. Her voice was low and brittle. I never meant for things to go that far. I thought I was helping the neighborhood. The judge's eyes narrowed. You dropped construction equipment on a resident's home without permits, without insurance, and then tried to silence him with a non-disclosure agreement. That's not helping. That's criminal negligence and attempted coercion. She turned slightly toward me. Mr. Weller, the court acknowledges your civil claim. Would you like to speak? I stood. I didn't come here looking for revenge, I said, but I won't pretend this didn't change my life. I had to move out of my home, rebuild it from pieces, and fight through months of legal filings just to prove something everyone already knew, that they were abusing their power. If the city hadn't stepped in, if people like Grace and Troy hadn't helped, they'd still be doing it. I paused, scanning the courtroom. 2 of the former board members were there, sitting behind Barbara. They didn't meet my eyes. This wasn't just about my house. It was about everyone they intimidated. Every family that was fined without cause. Every resident who got a lien because they planted the wrong color flowers. I want restitution not just for the damage, but for the years of unchecked tyranny they passed off as governance. The judge nodded. In addition to the plea agreement, the court is ordering restitution in the full amount of property damage as assessed by the independent contractor, plus an additional punitive amount for emotional distress and temporary relocation expenses. Civil damages are awarded in the amount of $84,000. Miss Zindel, you will serve 18 months in a white-collar detention facility and 5 years of probation. You are barred from holding fiduciary or administrative roles in any community board, nonprofit, or homeowners association for a period of 15 years. Barbara's attorney leaned in, whispering something. She didn't respond. The judge continued. As for the East Maplewood Homeowners Association, the court finds that its former board operated without oversight or transparency. The HOA shall be placed under city trusteeship for the next 24 months. All financial decisions must be approved by an independent auditor, and new elections must be held under city supervision. Any future bylaw changes require a supermajority vote from residents. After the gavel came down, the courtroom buzzed with hushed voices. I turned to leave, but before I reached the doors, someone tapped my shoulder. It was the new interim board president, a former school principal named Elijah Hart. He was in his 60s, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and never raised his voice louder than he needed to. You've done more than clean up a mess, he said. You gave people a reason to trust again. I just wanted my house back, I replied. He shook his head. And you gave us our neighborhood back. Outside, some of the neighbors gathered around. Grace was there, handing out copies of a new newsletter, one she'd written herself. It had updates on the restructured board, a schedule of open forums, and a list of proposed bylaw repeals. including the infamous symmetry clause Barbara had used to justify most of her fines. People were smiling. Not the forced smiles from block parties or yard of the month contests. Real ones. For the first time in a long while, East Maplewood felt like a place where people lived, not just existed under someone's thumb. Over the next few weeks, life began to normalize. The contractor finished the final touches on my kitchen. My homeowner's insurance, now with a full report from the city, reimbursed the last of the costs. I planted a new tree out front, a red maple, tall and already showing early signs of bloom. No one objected. I started getting invitations to cookouts, garage sales, even a weekly trivia night at the community center. I went to a few, though I mostly kept to myself. There was something satisfying about sitting on my porch with a coffee, watching the sunrise hit the new roofline, knowing that nothing was hanging over my head any more literally or figuratively. One Saturday, Elijah dropped by with a folder. Inside was an official resolution from the city recognizing the work I'd done during the investigation. It wasn't flashy, just a certificate and a letter from the mayor, but it felt meaningful. "There's talk of naming the community room after you," he said with a grin. "Let's not get carried away," I said. He laughed. "Then maybe just a plaque," I nodded. "Only if it's not symmetrical." He chuckled again before heading off. I stayed on the porch a little longer, letting the quiet settle in. The HOA was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't a throne anymore, it was a tool, something to be used by the community, not against it. Residents voted on rules. Meetings were recorded and posted online. Fines now required documentation and a formal appeal process, and most importantly, people showed up. They asked questions. They paid attention. As for Barbara, she disappeared from public view after her sentencing. Her cousin faced separate charges for laundering and tax evasion. The other former board members agreed to community service and were barred from future participation in HOA governance. The crane incident became a cautionary tale across the county. Other HOAs began auditing their practices, issuing transparency reports, and in some cases, rewriting their charters entirely. The city even launched a new initiative, HOA Oversight and Resident Protection, or HORP. It wasn't a catchy name, but it got the job done. I never imagined that a steel arm crashing through my roof would be the spark that changed everything. But sometimes, it takes something breaking to make people realize what's worth fixing. As spring gave way to summer, I took a final walk around the block. Lawns were mowed, kids rode scooters down the sidewalks, and porch lights flickered on one by one as the sun dipped below the trees. There was no more fear. No more fines for the wrong shade of mulch. Just neighbors living their lives equal, free, and finally heard.